The FBI raid on Cedar Falls City Hall started at dawn, but Emma Chen had been expecting it for 3 weeks. She watched from across Main Street as federal agents carried boxes of evidence through the same doors where she'd once served coffee to corrupt officials who thought a shy waitress would never notice their $800,000 theft. "You really think they'll all go to prison?" her mother asked, squeezing Emma's hand as news cameras surrounded the limestone building. Emma smiled, remembering the origami crane that had started everything. The delicate paper sculpture that had led her from serving pancakes to exposing the biggest municipal fraud in Iowa history. The same precision her grandmother had taught her for folding paper had helped her unfold a conspiracy that reached into every corner of Cedar Falls government. Subscribe if you want to see how one person with the right skills can bring down an entire corrupt system, Emma whispered, knowing that sometimes the most powerful weapon against injustice isn't anger. It's simply refusing to look away when the numbers don't add up. The real story had begun 6 months earlier, when a mysterious Japanese CEO walked into her diner and changed everything. The alarm clock's harsh buzz cut through Emma Chen's studio apartment at 4:30 in the morning, same as every weekday for the past 3 years. She rolled out of the narrow Murphy bed, feet hitting the cold linoleum floor, and immediately checked her phone for any overnight messages from Mercy Medical Center about her mother's condition. No news meant stable news, which counted as good news these days. Emma's morning routine had become mechanical precision born of necessity. Shower in 3 minutes to save on the electric bill. Instant coffee with powdered creamer because fresh milk cost too much for something she'd only use twice a week. Check the envelope tucked behind the microwave where she kept cash for her mother's physical therapy co-pays. Still $87 short for this month's sessions. The math never seemed to work out, no matter how many times she recalculated it. The walk to Maple Diner took 12 minutes down Main Street, past the empty storefronts that used to house Peterson's Pharmacy and Collins's Five and Dime. Cedar Falls had been slowly deflating since the agricultural processing plant closed 5 years ago, leaving behind a town of 4,000 people and diminishing prospects. Emma's breath formed small clouds in the October morning air as she unlocked the diner's front door, flipped the sign to "Open," and began her familiar dance of coffee prep and table setup. Her real life had ended the day she graduated from the University of Iowa with a bachelor's degree in accounting and a job offer from a Des Moines firm that would have paid $48,000 a year. That was also the day her mother suffered a massive stroke that left her partially paralyzed and requiring round-the-clock care. The choice between pursuing her career and staying home hadn't felt like a choice at all. 3 years later, Emma was still making coffee and taking orders while her classmates posted LinkedIn updates about promotions and corner offices. The first customers arrived at 5:45, Jerry Martinez from the grain elevator and Bob Fletcher, who ran the city's public works department. They ordered the same thing every morning: 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, hash browns, coffee black. Emma had their orders memorized along with everyone else's regular routine, which made the appearance of the black Lexus at 6:15 all the more jarring. Luxury cars didn't just wander into Cedar Falls by accident. The man who entered wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Emma made in 2 months, carrying a leather briefcase that looked like it had never seen a day of actual work. He was Asian, maybe mid-40s, with the kind of posture that suggested he was accustomed to boardrooms and international flights. Emma watched him scan the dining room before settling into booth 7, the one by the window with a clear view of City Hall across the street. "Coffee?" Emma asked, already reaching for the pot. "Black, please." His English was precise, barely touched by an accent. "And pancakes, if you have them." Emma poured his coffee and took the order, noticing how his eyes followed her movements with unusual attention. When she returned with the pancakes 15 minutes later, he had spread several documents across the table, official-looking papers with the City of Cedar Falls letterhead visible from her angle. The pancakes sat untouched as he seemed to study her more than the paperwork. "You work here long?" he asked when she refilled his coffee. 3 years. Emma hesitated, then added, "Since college? What did you study?" The question caught her off guard. Customers occasionally made small talk, but this felt different, more like an interview than casual conversation. "Accounting. University of Iowa. Something shifted in his expression. A subtle satisfaction that made Emma suddenly self-conscious. She noticed he had positioned one document so she could clearly see columns of numbers and budget line items, almost as if he wanted her to look. Despite herself, Emma found her eyes drawn to the figures, automatically scanning for the kind of discrepancies her professors had trained her to spot. When the man left 40 minutes later, he placed exact change on the table along with a business card and something else that made Emma's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. A perfect origami crane folded from white paper. She hadn't seen one since her grandmother's funeral 5 years ago, when Emma had folded dozens of them from colorful paper to honor the woman who had taught her the ancient art during childhood summers. The business card read simply, Hiroshi Tanaka, Chief Executive Officer, Sakura Manufacturing. Below that, an address on the industrial side of town and a phone number with a local area code. Emma turned the crane over in her palm, marveling at the crisp folds and precise angles. Someone had taken time and care with this, treating the simple act of folding paper as if it mattered. "Fancy customer this morning," said Dolores Martinez, the diner's day manager, sliding past with a pot of coffee for the early crowd. "Don't usually see suits in here unless somebody's getting audited." The word audited made Emma look again at the business card. Sakura Manufacturing. She vaguely remembered hearing about a Japanese company that had won some kind of city contract recently. Her mother had mentioned it during one of her more lucid moments, something about waste management and city council meetings that had gone later than usual. Emma's fingers traced the edge of the origami crane, feeling the precise geometry her grandmother had taught her to appreciate. At 2:30, when her shift ended, Emma walked home past City Hall and noticed something she had never paid attention to before. 3 black SUVs with government plates sat in the visitor parking spaces, and through the tall windows of the council chambers, she could see men in suits gesturing at what looked like architectural plans or engineering drawings. The scene reminded her of the documents Hiroshi Tanaka had been studying, and for the first time in 3 years, Emma felt a familiar stirring. The same intellectual curiosity that had made her love forensic accounting classes. That evening, while reviewing the books for Morrison's hardware store, her $15 an hour freelance work that helped cover groceries, Emma found herself thinking about numbers in ways she hadn't since college. Morrison's books showed a curious pattern she had noticed but never questioned. Several large cash deposits over the past 6 months, always in round figures like $5,000 or $10,000. The deposits didn't correspond to any invoices or sales records she could find. Emma reached for her laptop and opened a new spreadsheet, something she hadn't done for personal interest in years. As she began entering Morrison's financial data in clean columns, the origami crane sat on her desk like a small white sentinel, reminding her that some things were worth the time and care to unfold properly. Hiroshi Tanaka returned to Maple Diner on Thursday morning, this time carrying a manila folder thick with documents. Emma had been expecting him, though she couldn't quite explain why. Something about his previous visit had felt unfinished, like the first movement of a symphony that demanded completion. When he slid into the same booth and ordered the same black coffee, Emma felt a strange sense of inevitability. "Miss Chen," he said when she brought his coffee, "I wonder if you might have a few minutes to discuss something important." The morning rush had died down to its usual Thursday lull. Jerry Martinez reading the Cedar Falls Gazette over his 3rd cup of coffee, 2 retirees arguing about the Iowa Hawkeyes prospects, and Mrs. Patterson working her daily crossword puzzle. Emma glanced at Dolores, who nodded toward the back booth with obvious curiosity. "I'll be direct," Tanaka said as Emma sat across from him. "My company, Sakura Manufacturing, recently won a municipal contract with your city. $2.3 million to upgrade Cedar Falls waste management infrastructure." He opened the manila folder, revealing stacks of official documents. "During our preliminary review, we discovered what I can only call irregularities in the bidding process." Emma studied his face, searching for signs of deception or ulterior motive. Her accounting training had included courses in fraud detection, and she had learned to read the subtle tells that usually accompanied financial dishonesty. Tanaka showed none of them. No unnecessary eye contact, no defensive body language, no verbal hedging. If anything, he seemed uncomfortable with what he was about to reveal. "What kind of irregularities?" Emma asked. Tanaka spread 3 documents across the table. The first showed the original bid request, dated 6 months ago, with a 30-day submission deadline and detailed technical specifications. The second document, dated just 2 weeks later, showed revised specifications and a shortened 14-day deadline. The third document was a summary of the bidding results. Only 3 companies had submitted proposals, compared to the 8 or 9 typically expected for a contract of this size. "These modifications," Tanaka continued, pointing to highlighted sections in the revised specifications, "favored companies with very specific technical capabilities that, coincidentally, only my firm and one other possessed within the required time frame." He paused, letting Emma process the implications. "My company won with a bid 15% lower than our nearest competitor." Emma's mind automatically began calculating probabilities and analyzing patterns, the same way she had been trained to approach financial audits. "How did you know about the specification changes so quickly? The turnaround time seems impossibly fast," Tanaka finished. "Unless someone had advance notice." He pulled out another document, this one showing email timestamps and communication records. "My company received notification of the changes within 6 hours of their approval. Other potential bidders weren't informed until the following week." The implications began crystallizing in Emma's mind like a chemical reaction she had learned to recognize in her forensic accounting classes. Bid rigging wasn't uncommon in municipal contracts, but it usually left paper trails that could be traced if someone knew what to look for. "Why are you telling me this?" Tanaka's expression grew serious. "Because my company doesn't do business this way. We succeed through quality and efficiency, not through corruption." He gestured toward the documents. "But I also can't prove what I suspect without someone who understands financial analysis and has access to public records." "You want me to investigate your own company's contract?" Emma asked, incredulous. "I want you to investigate the truth," Tanaka corrected. "If my suspicions are wrong, then we proceed with a contract we won fairly. If they're correct, then we withdraw our bid and report our findings to the appropriate authorities." He leaned forward slightly. "I've been observing you, Miss Chen. 3 weeks ago, you discovered a $1,200 discrepancy in Morrison's hardware books that even the owner didn't know existed. Last week, you caught a calculation error in Mrs. Patterson's property tax assessment that saved her $400. Emma felt a flush of surprise mixed with unease. "You've been watching me?" "I've been looking for someone with both the skills and the integrity to handle this investigation properly," Tanaka said. "In a town this size, word travels quickly about who can be trusted with numbers." He reached into his briefcase and withdrew a check already made out to her name. $5,000 for a comprehensive review of all public documents related to this contract. Win or lose, the payment is yours. $5,000. Emma stared at the check, her mind immediately calculating what that money could accomplish. 2 months of her mother's physical therapy, 3 months of rent, the ability to buy groceries without checking her bank balance first. It was more money than she had seen in one place since her college graduation. "What exactly would you need me to do?" she asked, fighting to keep her voice steady. Tanaka opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. "Everything here is publicly available through Freedom of Information Act requests. City Council meeting minutes, budget appropriations, vendor communications, and timeline documentation. I need someone to analyze these documents for patterns or irregularities that might indicate coordination between city officials and preferred vendors." Emma examined the first few pages, recognizing the format from her municipal accounting courses. Black Hawk County maintained detailed records of all government expenditures, and Iowa's sunshine laws made most official communications available to public scrutiny. The work would be time-consuming but straightforward for someone with her background. "I'd need access to additional records," Emma said, her professional instincts engaging despite her caution. "Bank records, communication logs, meeting schedules. Some of that might require formal requests or legal assistance. I have an attorney standing by to file whatever FOIA requests you deem necessary," Tanaka replied. "And I'll cover any associated costs." He paused, studying her expression. "Miss Chen, I realize this is an unusual request from a stranger, but I've built my career on ethical business practices, and I won't compromise those standards now, even for a profitable contract. Emma looked again at the origami crane sitting on her table from Monday's visit, its precise folds representing hours of careful attention to detail. Something about Tanaka's proposition felt similar, a willingness to invest time and effort in getting the details right, regardless of the immediate cost or convenience. If I found evidence of impropriety, Emma said slowly, what would happen to your contract? We would withdraw our bid immediately and report our findings to the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, Tanaka said without hesitation. My company's reputation is worth more than any single contract. The diner had filled with the lunch crowd while they talked, and Emma became aware of familiar voices discussing familiar topics. Harvest prices, high school football, and the usual complaints about city government. Cedar Falls might be small, but it operated on the same fundamental principles as any municipality: public trust, transparent processes, and accountability to taxpayers. If those principles were being violated, someone needed to investigate. I'll need to do this work on my own time, Emma said finally, and I'll need complete autonomy in my analysis. No interference, no predetermined conclusions. Tanaka nodded. Agreed. How soon can you start? Emma folded the check and slipped it into her apron pocket, feeling the weight of both opportunity and responsibility. I can start tonight. As Tanaka gathered his documents and prepared to leave, he paused and looked directly at Emma. Miss Chen, what I'm asking you to do might make some people uncomfortable. Are you prepared for that possibility? Emma thought about her mother's medical bills, her own deferred dreams, and the origami crane that represented the kind of precision and care her grandmother had taught her to value. I've been uncomfortable for 3 years, she said. At least this way, the discomfort might serve a purpose. Emma's first stop Friday morning was the Black Hawk County Courthouse, an imposing limestone building that housed the official records of every government transaction in Cedar Falls. The clerk in the records department, a middle-aged woman named Patricia Knowles, looked surprised when Emma requested copies of all documents related to the Sakura Manufacturing Waste Management contract. That's a lot of paperwork, honey, Patricia said, adjusting her reading glasses. You sure you want all of it? The complete file runs about 400 pages. Everything, Emma confirmed, producing the $50 copying fee in cash, including any amendments, addendums, or supplementary communications. While Patricia gathered the documents, Emma reviewed Iowa's Freedom of Information Act requirements on her phone. As a public contract funded by taxpayer money, virtually every aspect of the bidding process should be available for citizen review. The few exceptions involved proprietary technical specifications or ongoing law enforcement investigations, neither of which should apply to a straightforward infrastructure contract. The documents Patricia provided painted a complex picture that Emma spent the weekend analyzing in her studio apartment. The original request for proposals, dated 6 months earlier, had sought bids for a comprehensive waste management upgrade including new trucks, improved routing software, and expanded recycling capabilities. The technical requirements were standard for a municipality of Cedar Falls' size, and the timeline allowed adequate preparation for qualified vendors. Then, something had changed. On July 15th, just 2 weeks after the original RFP was published, City Manager Patricia Walsh had issued revised specifications that dramatically altered the project scope. The new requirements included specific software compatibility standards, vehicle emission controls, and operational protocols that Emma recognized as highly specialized. The kind of detailed specifications that typically evolved after months of technical consultation, not weeks. Emma created a timeline spreadsheet, entering every date, signature, and approval stamp she could find in the documents. The pattern that emerged made her increasingly uncomfortable. The specification changes had been approved during a special city council session held on short notice, with only 4 of the 7 council members present. The meeting minutes showed a brief discussion and unanimous approval, but no record of the technical expertise that had supposedly justified the changes. More troubling was the timeline of vendor notifications. According to the email logs Patricia had included, Sakura Manufacturing had received notice of the specification changes within 6 hours of their approval. Midwest Waste Solutions, the regional company that had been considered the front-runner for the contract, hadn't been notified until 5 days later. 2 other potential bidders had learned about the changes only when they called the city to confirm their submission deadlines. Emma's accounting training had emphasized the importance of documentation trails, and this trail led to uncomfortable questions. She pulled up the city council meeting schedules on the municipal website and cross-referenced them with the timeline in her spreadsheet. The special session approving the specification changes had been called by Councilman Bradley Morrison, the same Morrison who owned the hardware store where Emma did freelance bookkeeping. Sunday afternoon, Emma drove to the library and used their public computers to research Sakura Manufacturing's corporate history. The company had been established in Japan in 1987 and had expanded to the United States in 2015, with facilities in Ohio, Illinois, and now Iowa. Their track record showed consistent profitability and no legal violations or ethical complaints, exactly what Hiroshi Tanaka had claimed about his company's reputation. Midwest Waste Solutions presented a more complicated picture. The company had been family-owned for 3 generations, with strong ties to local politicians and a history of municipal contracts throughout eastern Iowa. Emma found newspaper articles praising their community involvement and several photos of company executives at charity events alongside Cedar Falls city officials, including Patricia Walsh and Ken Fletcher, the public works director. The more Emma studied the documents, the more she appreciated the subtle sophistication of what appeared to be a carefully orchestrated manipulation. The specification changes weren't obviously fraudulent. They could be justified as legitimate improvements to the original project scope. The accelerated timeline wasn't illegal. Municipal emergencies sometimes required quick decisions. The vendor notifications, while uneven, weren't technically violations of bidding procedures. Yet taken together, these elements created a pattern that systematically favored one bidder while disadvantaging others. Emma had learned in her forensic accounting courses that the most effective fraud schemes avoided obvious violations while creating structural advantages that were difficult to detect or challenge. Monday morning, Emma requested additional documents from Patricia Knowles, this time focusing on the financial aspects of the contract approval process. She wanted to see the budget appropriations, payment schedules, and any supplementary funding arrangements that had been necessary to support the $2.3 million expenditure. These documents revealed another layer of complexity. The original municipal budget for waste management upgrades had allocated $1.8 million for the fiscal year. The additional $500,000 had come from a discretionary fund controlled by the city manager, with approval authority delegated to a subcommittee consisting of Patricia Walsh, Ken Fletcher, and Bradley Morrison. Emma cross-referenced the payment schedule with the city's cash flow statements and discovered something that made her pulse quicken. The contract called for a substantial upfront payment of $800,000 within 30 days of signing, ostensibly to cover equipment procurement and initial setup costs. This front-loading was unusual for municipal contracts, which typically spread payments across project milestones to minimize financial risk. Even more concerning was the discovery of a related contract Emma hadn't known existed. Buried in the supplementary documents was a $50,000 consulting agreement between the city and Morrison's Hardware for technical advisory services related to the waste management upgrade. The contract was dated just 1 week after the specification changes had been approved, and it designated Morrison as the primary liaison between city administration and the selected vendor. Emma stared at this document for several minutes, feeling the weight of its implications. Bradley Morrison had voted to approve specification changes that favored Sakura Manufacturing, then immediately contracted his own business to provide consulting services for the project. The potential for conflict of interest was obvious, yet the arrangement had been structured in a way that appeared technically legal. That evening, Emma called Hiroshi Tanaka and arranged to meet him at his office the following day. As she prepared her preliminary findings, she organized the documents into 3 categories: questionable but possibly legitimate, clearly irregular, and requiring additional investigation. The Morrison consulting contract fell squarely into the second category. Emma folded a piece of scrap paper into an origami crane while she worked, letting her fingers remember the precise movements her grandmother had taught her years ago. Each fold required attention to detail and patience, qualities that seemed increasingly relevant to the investigation she had undertaken. The crane that emerged was slightly imperfect, its proportions not quite matching the elegant example Tanaka had left at the diner. But it held together, which felt like a small victory. As Emma reviewed her timeline spreadsheet one final time before bed, she noticed something that made her stomach tighten with apprehension. Ken Fletcher, the public works director who had been instrumental in approving the specification changes, had been on vacation in Florida during the week those changes were supposedly developed and refined. According to his signature on multiple documents, Fletcher had been reviewing technical requirements and consulting with engineering experts while he was 1,700 miles away from his office. Either Fletcher had managed to conduct detailed municipal business from a beach resort, or someone had been signing documents in his absence. Neither possibility suggested the kind of transparent, accountable government that Cedar Falls taxpayers deserved. Sakura Manufacturing's offices occupied a converted warehouse on the industrial side of Cedar Falls, with clean lines and efficient lighting that reflected the company's reputation for operational precision. Hiroshi Tanaka met Emma in a conference room overlooking the main production floor, where workers were assembling what appeared to be waste management equipment, the very machinery intended for the contested municipal contract. "Your preliminary findings?" Tanaka asked, reviewing the organized documents Emma had prepared. Emma opened her laptop and displayed the timeline spreadsheet she had spent the weekend perfecting. "The pattern suggests coordination between specific city officials and advanced knowledge of specification changes. But I need to trace the financial connections more thoroughly before drawing definitive conclusions." Tanaka studied the spreadsheet, his expression growing increasingly serious as Emma walked him through each discrepancy. When she reached the Morrison consulting contract, he stopped her with a raised hand. $50,000 for technical advisory services, he repeated slowly. "What kind of technical expertise does a hardware store owner possess for waste management systems?" "That's what I intend to find out," Emma replied. She pulled up a second spreadsheet showing cash flow analysis. "I've requested additional financial records through FOIA. But I also want to examine the banking patterns around the time these contracts were approved. Public officials sometimes leave traces when they're receiving improper compensation." Over the next week, Emma developed a systematic approach to financial forensics that would have made her university professors proud. She created detailed spreadsheets tracking every significant expenditure by the city, cross-referenced with timing of key decisions and approvals. She mapped the relationships between city officials, their family members, and local businesses that had benefited from municipal contracts during the past 18 months. The banking records, obtained through careful FOIA requests, revealed patterns that raised immediate red flags. Patricia Walsh, the city manager, had made 3 large cash deposits to her personal account during the 6 months surrounding the Sakura contract approval. The deposits, $10,000 in May, $15,000 in July, and $12,000 in September, were each just below the threshold that would trigger automatic reporting requirements. More suspicious was the source documentation Walsh had provided for these deposits. All 3 were attributed to consulting fees from companies that Emma discovered were registered as limited liability corporations with addresses that didn't correspond to any physical business locations. When Emma drove to the addresses listed on the incorporation papers, she found a vacant office building, a residential address where the current tenant had never heard of the company, and a P.O. box at a commercial mail service. Ken Fletcher's financial records showed similar irregularities. Despite his municipal salary of $68,000 annually, Fletcher had purchased a new boat, a recreational vehicle, and had made significant improvements to his home during the past year. The financing documents for these purchases showed cash down payments totaling $43,000, money that couldn't be accounted for through his official income or savings history. Emma's investigation of Morrison's hardware revealed the most complex financial structure. The business had received not only the $50,000 consulting contract, but also 3 separate emergency procurement contracts totaling an additional $37,000 for miscellaneous supplies and services related to various municipal projects. These emergency contracts had bypassed the normal competitive bidding process, citing urgent operational needs. The paper trail for Morrison's emergency contracts led Emma to discover a broader pattern of procurement irregularities. Over the past 18 months, Cedar Falls had issued 41 emergency contracts worth a total of $238,000. This was nearly triple the emergency procurement activity from the previous 3 years combined, and the majority of these contracts had been awarded to businesses owned by individuals with direct connections to city government. Emma's forensic analysis revealed a sophisticated scheme that operated just within the boundaries of legal technicality while systematically violating the spirit of transparent municipal governance. The conspirators had been careful to structure their activities in ways that would be difficult to prosecute, but impossible to ignore once the pattern was fully documented. The breakthrough came when Emma gained access to email communications between city officials through an expanded FOIA request. The messages, retrieved from the city's backup servers, showed a clear coordination between Walsh, Fletcher, and Morrison in the weeks leading up to the specification changes. Most damaging was an email thread discussing the need to manage the bidding timeline to ensure optimal vendor participation. In one particularly revealing exchange, Walsh had written to Fletcher, "The modifications we discussed will need to be implemented before the end of July to meet our target schedule. Please coordinate with Bradley to ensure smooth council approval." Fletcher's response included specific suggestions for technical requirements that would naturally limit the candidate pool to serious contenders. Emma printed every relevant email and organized them chronologically alongside the official documents and financial records. The complete picture showed a conspiracy that had operated for at least 18 months, systematically directing municipal contracts to preferred vendors in exchange for financial compensation disguised as consulting fees and emergency procurements. The most sophisticated element of the scheme was its use of shell companies and indirect payments that made traditional auditing difficult. Walsh had received her payments through companies that existed only on paper, while Fletcher had been compensated through inflated contracts for services that were either unnecessary or never actually provided. Morrison had benefited both directly through his consulting contract and indirectly through his family's position in the approved vendor network. Emma calculated that the total amount of misappropriated taxpayer funds exceeded $800,000 over 18 months, not including the potential overpayments on contracts that had been awarded through corrupted processes. For a municipality the size of Cedar Falls, this represented a significant betrayal of public trust and a substantial drain on resources that should have been used for legitimate public services. When Emma presented her complete analysis to Tanaka the following Friday, she included a comprehensive recommendation for next steps. The evidence was sufficient to warrant a formal complaint to the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation. But she suggested first giving the involved officials an opportunity to resign and make restitution voluntarily. This level of coordination requires a response that serves both justice and community healing, Emma explained. A public scandal might satisfy our need for accountability, but it could also damage the city's reputation and economic prospects for years to come. Tanaka reviewed the complete file, spending nearly 2 hours examining Emma's documentation and analysis. When he finally looked up, his expression was grave but determined. "Miss Chen, you've uncovered exactly the kind of systematic corruption my company refuses to participate in," he said. "What do you recommend as our next course of action?" Emma had been considering this question for days. "We approach them privately first. Give them 72 hours to resign their positions and arrange full restitution. If they refuse, we take everything to the state investigators and the local media simultaneously." Tanaka nodded slowly. "And what about the contract with my company?" "Your company won the contract through a corrupted process, even though you had no knowledge of the corruption," Emma replied. "The ethical response is to withdraw your bid and recompete under a transparent process." "Agreed," Tanaka said immediately. "When do we make contact with the officials?" Emma looked at her watch. It was 3:30 on a Friday afternoon, late enough in the week that city offices would be relatively quiet, but early enough to allow for serious conversations before the weekend. "Monday morning," she said. "I'll request a private meeting with all three officials together. That way, they can't claim ignorance of what the others were doing." As Emma packed her documents and prepared to leave, Tanaka handed her an envelope. Inside was a check for an additional $2,000 and a brief note. "For exceptional professional service and unwavering ethical standards." Emma studied the check, thinking about what this money could accomplish for her mother's care and her own financial stability. But she also thought about the $800,000 that had been stolen from Cedar Falls taxpayers, and the systematic betrayal of public trust that had made such theft possible. "Mr. Tanaka," she said finally, "I want you to know that regardless of how this turns out, working on this investigation has been the most important thing I've done since college." Tanaka smiled for the first time since she had met him. "Miss Chen, I believe this investigation might be the most important thing either of us has ever done." Emma scheduled the meeting for 9 o'clock Monday morning in the Cedar Falls City Hall conference room, formally requesting the presence of City Manager Patricia Walsh, Public Works Director Ken Fletcher, and Councilman Bradley Morrison. She identified herself as a forensic accounting consultant working on behalf of Secura Manufacturing and indicated that the meeting concerned significant irregularities in the municipal contracting process that require immediate attention. The conference room occupied the second floor of City Hall, with tall windows overlooking Main Street and walls lined with framed photographs of Cedar Falls municipal history. Emma arrived 15 minutes early, arranging her documents in 3 identical folders, one for each official, and testing the digital recorder she had brought to ensure accurate documentation of the proceedings. Patricia Walsh entered first, a woman in her late 50s with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to controlling municipal meetings. She was followed by Ken Fletcher, whose nervous energy contrasted sharply with Walsh's composed demeanor. Bradley Morrison arrived last, his familiar face carrying an expression of barely concealed hostility that Emma had never seen during their routine interactions at his hardware store. "Miss Chen," Walsh began, settling into her chair with practiced authority, "I understand you've been conducting some kind of investigation into city business. I hope you realize that municipal contracts are complex matters that require professional expertise to interpret correctly." Emma activated her digital recorder and placed it in the center of the table, noting the time and date for the official record. "Under Iowa law, all municipal proceedings involving potential criminal activity may be recorded by interested parties," she stated calmly. "This meeting concerns evidence of systematic fraud in your administration's contracting processes over the past 18 months. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Fletcher shifted uncomfortably in his chair, while Morrison's face reddened with what appeared to be suppressed anger. Walsh maintained her composure, but Emma noticed a slight tension in her jaw that suggested the city manager was no longer feeling quite so confident. Emma opened the first folder and began presenting her evidence methodically, starting with the timeline of specification changes for the Sakura manufacturing contract. She walked them through the accelerated approval process, the uneven vendor notifications, and the financial irregularities surrounding the budget modifications. Her presentation was clinical and precise, focusing on documented facts rather than accusations or interpretations. "These timeline discrepancies could have innocent explanations," Walsh interjected after Emma had outlined the bidding irregularities. "Municipal operations sometimes require expedited decision-making to serve the public interest." "That's certainly possible," Emma agreed, opening the second folder. "However, the financial evidence suggests a more systematic pattern of coordination." She spread out the banking records, showing Walsh's unexplained cash deposits and Fletcher's sudden increase in spending power. These deposits correspond directly with key decision points in the contracting timeline. Fletcher's composure cracked first. "Those deposits are legitimate consulting income," he said, his voice carrying a defensive edge. "I provide technical expertise to private companies on my own time. There's nothing illegal about that." Emma consulted her notes. "According to the incorporation records, the companies that supposedly paid you these consulting fees don't maintain physical offices or demonstrate any actual business activity. Their registered addresses include a vacant building, a residential address where the tenant has never heard of the company, and a commercial mail drop. Morrison finally spoke, his tone aggressive and confrontational. "Who hired you to conduct this investigation? What's your real agenda here?" "I was hired by Sakura Manufacturing to analyze the contracting process after they discovered irregularities in the bidding procedures," Emma replied evenly. "My agenda is to determine whether taxpayer funds have been misappropriated through fraudulent municipal procedures." Emma opened the third folder and presented the email communications she had obtained through FOIA requests. The messages clearly documented coordination between the three officials in manipulating contract specifications and vendor notifications. She read selected excerpts aloud, including Walsh's instruction to manage the bidding timeline and Fletcher's suggestions for technical requirements that would naturally limit the candidate pool. These emails demonstrate active coordination to manipulate the competitive bidding process, Emma continued. When combined with the financial evidence and timeline analysis, they establish a clear pattern of systematic fraud, totaling approximately $800,000 in misappropriated taxpayer funds. Walsh's professional composure finally showed cracks. "Young lady, you're making very serious accusations based on incomplete information and selective interpretation of routine municipal communications." "I'm presenting documented evidence of criminal activity," Emma corrected. "The question now is how you choose to respond to this evidence." Emma reached into her briefcase and withdrew 3 identical envelopes, placing one in front of each official. "These contain detailed summaries of all evidence I've gathered, along with 3 options for resolving this situation." She paused, allowing them time to process the gravity of their circumstances before continuing. Option 1. Voluntary resignation from your positions within 72 hours. Accompanied by full restitution of misappropriated funds and cooperation with a transition process that ensures minimal disruption to city operations. Fletcher opened his envelope and began scanning the contents, his face growing pale as he absorbed the comprehensive documentation of his financial irregularities. Option 2, Emma continued. Formal referral to the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation for prosecution under state laws governing municipal fraud, accompanied by full public disclosure of all evidence through local and regional media outlets. Morrison slammed his hand on the table. "This is extortion. You can't walk in here and threaten elected officials with some kind of amateur investigation." Emma's voice remained steady and professional. Option 3. You take no action, and I proceed with both criminal referral and public disclosure, while also providing copies of all evidence to the Iowa State Auditor's Office and the Federal Bureau of Investigation for potential federal charges related to mail fraud and conspiracy. The room fell silent except for the sound of Fletcher nervously shuffling through the documents in his envelope. Emma could see him calculating the weight of evidence against him, and she suspected he was the most likely to break ranks with his co-conspirators. Walsh attempted to regain control of the situation. "Miss Chen, even if your allegations had merit, the procedures you're describing are matters for the appropriate authorities to investigate through proper channels. You can't simply demand resignations based on your own interpretations." "The evidence speaks for itself," Emma replied. $800,000 in taxpayer funds have been systematically diverted through fraudulent contracts and shell company payments. The documentation is comprehensive and legally admissible. The only question is whether you prefer to resolve this privately or publicly." Emma stood and gathered her materials, leaving the evidence folders on the table. "You have 72 hours to notify me of your decision. If I don't hear from you by Thursday at 9 a.m., I'll proceed with options 2 and 3 simultaneously." As Emma headed toward the door, Fletcher called after her. "Wait, what guarantees do we have that you won't pursue criminal charges if we cooperate?" Emma paused with her hand on the doorknob. "I'm not a prosecutor, Mr. Fletcher. I can't guarantee anything except that cooperation and restitution will be documented as part of any official record. How the authorities choose to proceed will depend on factors beyond my control." Morrison's voice carried a threatening edge. "You realize what you're doing to this community? The damage a scandal like this could cause?" Emma turned back to face him. "Mr. Morrison, the damage to this community was caused by your systematic theft of taxpayer money over the past 18 months. I'm simply documenting that damage and providing an opportunity for you to minimize additional harm through voluntary accountability." Walsh made one final attempt to assert her authority. "This meeting is over. Miss Chen, You'll be hearing from the city's legal counsel regarding your inappropriate conduct and unfounded allegations." "The meeting is concluded," Emma agreed, checking her watch. "But the evidence remains unchanged, regardless of how you choose to characterize it." 72 hours, ending Thursday at 9 a.m. Emma left City Hall and walked directly to her car, where Hiroshi Tanaka was waiting as they had arranged. Her hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline of confrontation, but she felt a satisfaction she hadn't experienced since college, the satisfaction of applying her professional skills to serve justice and public accountability. "How did they respond?" Tanaka asked as Emma settled into the passenger seat. "Exactly as we expected," Emma replied. "Denial, deflection, and threats. But Fletcher is wavering. I think he'll break ranks within 48 hours. Tanaka started the engine and pulled away from City Hall. "And if they don't accept the ultimatum?" Emma looked back at the limestone building where she had just confronted 3 corrupt officials with irrefutable evidence of their crimes. "Then we proceed with public disclosure and criminal referral. The evidence is solid, and the community deserves the truth." Thursday morning arrived without any communication from the city officials. Emma had spent Wednesday evening preparing comprehensive packets for the Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation, the Cedar Falls Gazette, and KWWL Television News. At exactly 9 a.m., she began making the calls that would transform a private ultimatum into a public scandal. The first call went to Special Agent Rebecca Martinez at the Iowa DCI office in Cedar Rapids. Emma identified herself as a forensic accounting consultant and requested an immediate meeting to present evidence of systematic municipal fraud involving approximately $800,000 in taxpayer funds. Martinez, who specialized in public corruption cases, agreed to meet that afternoon. Emma's second call was to Tom Richardson, editor of the Cedar Falls Gazette. She had chosen Richardson because his newspaper had consistently advocated for government transparency and had published several investigative pieces about municipal spending irregularities in neighboring counties. Richardson agreed to meet at 11 a.m. to review her documentation. The third call went to Sarah Kim, an investigative reporter for KWL who had won regional awards for her coverage of political corruption in eastern Iowa. Kim was immediately interested and arranged to meet Emma at 1 p.m. with a camera crew for what could become the lead story on the evening news. By 10 a.m., word of Emma's investigation had reached City Hall through informal networks that connected law enforcement, media, and municipal government. Emma's phone began ringing with calls from Patricia Walsh's attorney, demanding immediate cessation of what he termed a malicious campaign of harassment against dedicated public servants. Emma let the calls go to voicemail while she prepared for her meeting with Tom Richardson. The Cedar Falls Gazette operated out of a converted storefront on Main Street, 3 blocks from City Hall, with a staff of 6 full-time journalists covering local news, sports, and community events for a readership of approximately 12,000 residents. Richardson, a veteran journalist in his early 60s, reviewed Emma's evidence with the methodical attention of someone who had covered municipal politics for 30 years. He asked detailed questions about her methodology, requested copies of key documents, and spent considerable time examining the email communications and financial records. "Miss Chen," Richardson said after reviewing the complete file, "this is the most comprehensive documentation of municipal corruption I've seen in 3 decades of journalism. Are you prepared for the attention this investigation will attract?" Emma nodded. "The evidence speaks for itself. The community deserves to know how their tax money has been stolen." Richardson agreed to publish a complete expose in the Friday morning edition, with additional follow-up stories as the investigation progressed. He also committed to maintaining copies of all documentation in case legal challenges attempted to suppress the evidence. Emma's meeting with Sarah Kim proved equally productive. The KWL reporter had covered similar corruption cases in other Iowa municipalities and immediately recognized the significance of Emma's findings. Kim arranged for a comprehensive television interview to air Thursday evening, with additional segments planned for the weekend news programs. "We'll need to be careful about legal exposure," Kim warned. "These officials will probably claim defamation and demand retractions. Are you confident about every detail in your analysis?" Emma opened her laptop and walked Kim through the complete evidence file. explaining her methodology and showing the source documentation for each conclusion. The reporter took careful notes and requested copies of key documents to support her television coverage. The story broke Thursday evening on KWWL's 6 o'clock news with Sarah Kim's report titled, "Forensic Investigation Reveals Systematic Fraud in Cedar Falls Government." The segment included Emma's recorded interview, excerpts from the incriminating emails, and graphic displays showing the flow of taxpayer money through shell companies to officials' personal accounts. The public response was immediate and intense. By Friday morning, the Cedar Falls City Hall parking lot was filled with news vehicles from regional television stations and newspapers. Angry residents gathered outside the building, demanding answers and accountability from their elected representatives. Patricia Walsh called an emergency press conference for Friday afternoon, attempting to control the narrative before the weekend. She stood behind a podium in the City Hall lobby, flanked by the city's legal counsel and a public relations consultant brought in from Des Moines. The allegations made by this accounting consultant are based on selective interpretation of routine municipal documents, Walsh declared to the assembled reporters. Ms. Chen lacks the professional qualifications and legal authority to conduct the kind of investigation she claims to have undertaken. Emma watched the press conference from her apartment, taking notes on Walsh's defensive statements and factual errors. The city manager's strategy was clearly to discredit Emma personally rather than address the specific evidence of financial irregularities and coordination. Tom Richardson's expose in Friday morning's Cedar Falls Gazette provided the detailed analysis that television news couldn't accommodate. The newspaper ran a 4-page special section titled, "Following the Money: How City Officials Allegedly Stole $800,000 from Taxpayers." The coverage included timeline graphics, excerpts from official emails, and sidebar explanations of municipal contracting procedures that made the fraud accessible to general readers. The story was picked up by the Des Moines Register, the Quad City Times, and eventually by the Associated Press wire service. By Friday evening, Cedar Falls had become a case study in small-town political corruption, drawing attention from government watchdog organizations and anti-corruption advocates across Iowa. Ken Fletcher broke first, exactly as Emma had predicted. Late Friday afternoon, he called a separate press conference to announce his immediate resignation and his intention to cooperate fully with state and federal investigations. Fletcher's attorney read a prepared statement acknowledging errors in judgment and inappropriate financial arrangements, while stopping short of admitting criminal activity. Mr. Fletcher deeply regrets his involvement in activities that violated the public trust, his attorney announced. He is prepared to make full restitution for any financial damages and to provide complete cooperation with law enforcement authorities. Bradley Morrison's response was more combative. He held his own press conference Friday evening, surrounded by supporters who characterized the investigation as a politically motivated attack on local business and government. Morrison denied any wrongdoing and announced his intention to file defamation lawsuits against Emma, the Cedar Falls Gazette, and KWWL Television. "This is a witch hunt orchestrated by outside agitators who want to destroy the successful partnerships between city government and local business," Morrison declared. "I have served this community with integrity for 12 years, and I will not be driven from office by false accusations and character assassination." Saturday morning brought a dramatic escalation when Special Agent Martinez arrived at City Hall with a team of investigators and a search warrant authorizing seizure of all financial records, email communications, and contracting documents related to municipal operations during the past 2 years. The search lasted 6 hours and resulted in the confiscation of dozens of boxes of documents and several computer hard drives. Patricia Walsh maintained her defiant stance through the weekend, but cracks in her position became evident when several other city employees came forward with information about irregular procedures and pressure to expedite certain contracts. By Sunday evening, 2 additional council members had called for Walsh's resignation, and the Iowa State Auditor had announced a comprehensive review of Cedar Falls' financial management practices. Emma spent the weekend fielding calls from reporters, law enforcement officials, and government accountability organizations. The investigation she had started as a $5,000 consulting project had evolved into a regional news with implications for municipal governance throughout Iowa. Sunday evening, Emma received a call from Hiroshi Tanaka, who had maintained a low profile during the media coverage while consulting with his company's legal counsel about their position. "Miss Chen," Tanaka said, "Sakura Manufacturing is formally withdrawing our bid for the waste management contract. We'll request that the city reopen the bidding process under proper oversight once this investigation is completed." Emma felt a wave of satisfaction mixed with exhaustion. "That's the right decision, Mr. Tanaka. Thank you for supporting this investigation, even though it cost your company a profitable contract." "Miss Chen," Tanaka replied, "there are some victories that matter more than profit. What you've accomplished this week is exactly that kind of victory." The Iowa Division of Criminal Investigation moved quickly once they had access to the seized documents and digital evidence. Within 2 weeks, Special Agent Martinez had confirmed Emma's financial analysis and identified additional irregularities that extended the scope of the investigation to cover 3 years of municipal contracting rather than the 18 months Emma had initially examined. Patricia Walsh was indicted by a Black Hawk County grand jury on 14 counts of misconduct in office, fraud, and conspiracy to defraud taxpayers. The charges carried potential sentences totaling 35 years in prison and fines up to $500,000. Ken Fletcher, who had cooperated fully with investigators, faced reduced charges and agreed to a plea bargain requiring complete restitution and 2 years of community service. Bradley Morrison's legal situation proved more complex. While his coordination with the other officials was clearly documented, his role as an elected council member provided certain legal protections that required careful navigation by prosecutors. Morrison was ultimately charged with conflict of interest violations and fraud, but his case was scheduled for trial rather than plea negotiations. The financial recovery exceeded Emma's original estimate. Investigators traced additional shell company payments and discovered that the conspiracy had operated for nearly 3 years, systematically directing municipal contracts worth over $1.2 million to preferred vendors in exchange for kickbacks and consulting fees. The total amount of recovered funds reached $947,000 after asset seizures and restitution agreements. Cedar Falls' recovery process began with the appointment of an interim city manager selected by the Iowa Department of Management to oversee municipal operations during the transition. The interim manager, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, no relation to the indicted Patricia Walsh, brought experience in municipal reform from similar situations in other Iowa communities. The City Council, now operating with 2 vacant seats due to resignations, voted unanimously to implement new procurement policies requiring independent oversight for all contracts exceeding $50,000. The reforms included mandatory public comment periods, third-party auditing of vendor selections, and quarterly transparency reports available to all residents through the city website. Emma's role in the investigation brought recognition from professional organizations throughout Iowa. The Iowa Society of Certified Public Accountants presented her with their Public Interest Service Award at their annual convention in Des Moines. The recognition came with a scholarship for continuing education and invitations to speak at conferences about forensic accounting and municipal fraud detection. More personally meaningful was the response from her own community. The recovered taxpayer funds enabled Cedar Falls to proceed with several deferred infrastructure projects, including expansion of the senior center where Emma's mother received physical therapy. The City Council voted to name the renovated facility the Emma Chen Community Transparency Center, recognizing her role in exposing the corruption that had delayed these improvements. Emma's consulting practice grew rapidly as word spread about her investigative skills and ethical standards. She received requests from attorneys, insurance companies, and municipal governments throughout eastern Iowa to conduct forensic accounting reviews. The income allowed her to hire an assistant, rent proper office space, and provide better care for her mother while still maintaining her connection to the Maple Diner that had inadvertently launched her career transformation. Hiroshi Tanaka's Sakura Manufacturing eventually won the waste management contract through a properly administered competitive bidding process overseen by the Iowa Department of Management. The new contract, awarded at a fair market price through transparent procedures, became a model for reformed municipal contracting throughout the region. Tanaka also established the Cedar Falls Ethics in Government Scholarship at the University of Iowa, providing financial support for accounting students who demonstrated commitment to public service and professional integrity. Emma served on the Scholarship Selection Committee, helping to identify future accountants who shared her values of precision, transparency, and service to community welfare. The long-term impact of the investigation extended beyond Cedar Falls to influence municipal governance throughout Iowa. The state legislature passed new requirements for public reporting of municipal contracts, mandatory ethics training for elected officials, and stronger protections for whistleblowers who report government fraud. The legislation was informally known as the Cedar Falls Transparency Act, in recognition of the case that had sparked statewide reform. Emma's mother's health continued to improve with better medical care and the reduced financial stress that accompanied Emma's professional success. The origami crane that had started the investigation found a permanent place on Emma's desk in her new office, serving as a reminder that precision and patience could transform not only paper into art, but evidence into justice. The community healing process took longer than the legal proceedings. Cedar Falls had to rebuild trust between citizens and their government while addressing the practical challenges of operating with reduced staff and tighter oversight procedures. Town hall meetings became more frequent and better attended, with residents taking increased interest in municipal operations and budget oversight. Emma found herself serving as an unofficial community educator, teaching basic financial literacy courses at the community college and helping local business owners understand proper bookkeeping procedures. Her role evolved from forensic investigator to civic educator, using her skills to strengthen the community's capacity for self-governance and accountability. The trials of Patricia Walsh and Bradley Morrison provided additional closure for the community. Walsh's conviction on 12 of 14 charges resulted in a 6-year prison sentence and complete financial restitution. Morrison's trial ended with conviction on fraud charges and a 3-year sentence, along with permanent disqualification from holding elected office in Iowa. Emma testified in both trials, presenting her evidence with the same methodical precision that had characterized her original investigation. The prosecutors praised her documentation as exemplary, noting that her careful attention to proper procedures and chain of custody had made their cases significantly easier to prosecute. 1 year after the investigation began, Cedar Falls hosted its first Transparency Day, an annual event featuring open government forums, public budget discussions, and recognition for citizens who had contributed to honest governance. Emma delivered the keynote address, emphasizing that transparency was not a one-time achievement, but an ongoing commitment requiring constant vigilance from both officials and citizens. The event also featured exhibits about the investigation, including displays showing how systematic fraud had been detected through careful analysis of public records. High school students participated in mock forensic accounting exercises, learning how mathematical skills could be applied to serve justice and community welfare. Emma's speech concluded with a reflection on the power of individual action to create systemic change. This investigation succeeded because one person was willing to ask uncomfortable questions and follow evidence wherever it led, she said. Every community has citizens with the skills and integrity to hold their government accountable. The only question is whether they're willing to act when action is needed. As the first Transparency Day celebration concluded, Emma walked home past the City Hall where she had confronted corrupt officials 12 months earlier. The building now housed a reformed government operating under enhanced oversight and public scrutiny. More importantly, it had become a symbol of what was possible when citizens demanded accountability and officials responded with genuine reform. Emma Chen stood in the renovated conference room of City Hall, looking out at the same view of Main Street where her investigation had begun 18 months earlier. The room now displayed framed copies of the new transparency policies and ethics guidelines that had emerged from her forensic accounting work. More symbolically, it housed a small glass case containing the original origami crane Hiroshi Tanaka had left at Maple Diner, donated to the city as a permanent reminder that precision and patience could transform both paper and public institutions. The monthly city council meeting was about to begin, and Emma attended regularly now as both a concerned citizen and the chair of the newly created Municipal Oversight Committee. The committee, composed of volunteers with professional expertise in accounting, law, and public administration, reviewed all significant contracts and expenditures before council approval. What had started as Emma's solitary investigation had evolved into a systematic approach to preventing future corruption. Councilwoman Sarah Peterson called the meeting to order, noting that tonight's agenda included a progress report on the community improvement projects funded by recovered taxpayer money. The senior center expansion was complete. The library's computer lab had been upgraded, and a new small business loan program had helped 6 local entrepreneurs start or expand their operations. The recovered funds had produced tangible benefits that residents could see and appreciate throughout their community. Emma's consulting practice had grown beyond her original expectations, with clients throughout Iowa and neighboring states seeking her expertise in forensic accounting and municipal fraud detection. She had hired 2 assistants and moved to larger offices above Morrison's hardware store, the same building where her investigation had begun with suspicious cash deposits in Bradley Morrison's financial records. The irony of the location appealed to her sense of justice and completion. Her mother's health had stabilized significantly with improved medical care and reduced stress. Physical therapy at the renamed Community Transparency Center had restored much of her mobility, and she had begun volunteering with the literacy program at the public library. Emma often thought about the domino effect of small actions, how Tanaka's concern about ethics had led to her investigation, which had led to systematic reform, which had led to better community services that directly benefited her family. Hiroshi Tanaka had returned to Japan 6 months earlier, but they maintained regular correspondence through email and occasional video calls. His scholarship program at the University of Iowa had supported 8 students so far, with 2 already graduating and beginning careers in public accounting. Tanaka's influence on Emma's life had extended far beyond the original consulting contract, inspiring a career transformation that aligned her professional skills with her values of service and integrity. The Maple Diner remained Emma's morning coffee stop 3 days a week, though she no longer worked there as a waitress. Dolores Martinez had promoted her teenage daughter to morning shift supervisor, and the restaurant thrived with the economic recovery that followed the cleanup of municipal government. Emma's booth, number 7, where she had first met Tanaka, bore a small brass plaque reading, "Where Transparency Began." During tonight's council meeting, Emma listened as city staff presented the quarterly financial transparency report, a comprehensive document showing all expenditures, contracts, and budget variances in language accessible to ordinary citizens. The report was posted on the city website, distributed through the local newspaper, and discussed at public forums designed to encourage citizen engagement with municipal operations. The contrast with the secretive, coordinated corruption Emma had exposed was striking. Every significant decision now involved multiple levels of review, public input periods, and documented justification. The system wasn't perfect, but it represented a fundamental shift toward accountability and openness that had become a model for other Iowa municipalities. After the meeting, Emma walked home through downtown Cedar Falls, noting the signs of economic recovery and community confidence that had accompanied the governmental reforms. New businesses had opened, property values had stabilized, and the town had attracted positive media attention for its transformation from scandal to transparency leadership. At home in her apartment, now a spacious 2-bedroom place where her mother had her own room and medical equipment, Emma sat at her desk to review the next day's consulting appointments. Tomorrow would bring meetings with clients from 3 different counties, each seeking help with forensic analysis or fraud prevention programs. Her work had evolved from reactive investigation to proactive education, helping communities strengthen their systems before problems developed. Emma opened her laptop and began preparing materials for a presentation at next week's Iowa Municipal Finance Officers Association conference. The topic was Early Warning Systems for Municipal Fraud Detection, and her presentation would teach other finance professionals to recognize the red flags she had identified during her investigation of Cedar Falls corruption. As she worked, Emma's fingers unconsciously played with a piece of paper on her desk, folding it into familiar patterns learned from her grandmother decades earlier. The resulting origami crane was nearly perfect. Her technique had improved significantly during the past 18 months of practice. She placed the crane next to her computer monitor, where it joined a small collection of similar figures that reminded her of the precision and patience required for both paper folding and financial investigation. Emma's phone rang with a call from a municipal attorney in Davenport who had discovered irregularities in their city's procurement records. As she listened to the attorney describe suspicious patterns in contract awards and vendor payments, Emma felt the familiar intellectual excitement that had first drawn her to forensic accounting. Each new case was a puzzle requiring methodical analysis, careful documentation, and unwavering commitment to truth. "I can start the preliminary analysis next week," Emma told the attorney. "I'll need complete access to your financial records, contracting files, and email communications for the relevant period." The conversation reminded her of her first meeting with Tanaka, when she had been uncertain about her abilities and intimidated by the scope of municipal corruption. Now she approached such investigations with confidence earned through experience and success. As Emma finished preparing for tomorrow's appointments, she reflected on the unexpected trajectory her life had taken since that Monday morning when a stranger in a black suit had left an origami crane at her table in Maple Diner. She had transformed from a frustrated waitress with an unused accounting degree to a recognized expert in municipal fraud detection, earning both financial security and professional fulfillment while serving the cause of government accountability. The origami crane on her desk caught the light from her desk lamp, its white paper still crisp despite being folded and refolded dozens of times during the investigation. Like the investigation itself, the crane represented the transformation that was possible when careful attention was paid to seemingly simple materials. Emma had learned that truth, like origami, required patience, precision, and respect for the underlying structure that made transformation possible. Emma turned off her desk lamp and headed toward bed, already thinking about tomorrow's cases and the opportunity to help other communities achieve the kind of transparency and accountability that Cedar Falls had discovered through necessity and determination. Outside her window, the lights of City Hall reminded her that good government was not an accident, but an achievement requiring constant vigilance and citizen engagement. In 18 months, Emma had learned that one person with the right skills, ethical standards, and determination could indeed transform an entire system. More importantly, she had learned that such transformations, once begun, could inspire others to demand and maintain the standards of honesty and accountability that democracy required to function properly. The origami crane would remain on her desk as a permanent reminder that even the most complex challenges could be approached with the fundamental principles her grandmother had taught her: careful attention to detail, respect for proper procedure, and the patience to fold each crease exactly where it belonged.